Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. The summer heat of 1968 was scorching the rural lands of California. In the deep dark of night, a light breeze swept through the air. The trees rustled softly, and the occasional call of an owl broke the silence from afar. On this night, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were about to experience what should have been an ordinary evening. The two young lovers, confident that they were in for a pleasant night, felt as if nothing could go wrong. At just 16, Betty Lou was full of life. David, 17, was calm and gentle. They parked along one of California's rugged, remote country roads, and as they sat beneath the stars, the night seemed peaceful and serene. But that night would not be like any other. In the isolation of the car, far from the noise of the world, the couple chatted without realizing how quickly time was passing. They had planned a walk by the river later, but their plans would soon be overshadowed by an unimaginable horror. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the silence. At first, it seemed like an unfamiliar sound blending into the night. But this was no car engine. It was the sound of footsteps. Betty Lou turned her head, and in the darkness, she noticed a shadowy figure appearing. The shape was blurry, but the hands were clear. One of them held a gleaming metal object in the dark, a gun. David immediately locked the windows, gripping Betty Lou's arm as he tried to figure out what to do. But the man was slowly approaching the car. Without saying a word, he took a deep breath and whispered something in a chilling tone as he moved closer to the vehicle. The man's eyes were obscured, his face shadowed, but his body language exuded an unnerving threat. Without a word, he pointed the gun directly at them. In that moment, only one thing was clear in his mind: fear, terror, and death. Betty Lou jumped in her seat and screamed, but her voice was lost in the stillness of the night. David, terrified, glanced out of the window, trying to understand who this man was. In less than a second, a shot rang out. The first bullet struck David in the chest. He collapsed immediately. Betty Lou, in a panic to survive, scrambled to find an escape route while witnessing her boyfriend fall in agony. Another shot rang out and Betty Lou was hit in the chest. She screamed as she collapsed to the ground, but the world fell silent after her cry. In that instant, everything stopped. As the man continued pulling the trigger, Betty Lou and David's lives were brutally ended. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the night, but no other noise followed. After calmly carrying out the murders, the man disappeared into the darkness. Both young victims would never wake again, their lives extinguished in an instant. All that remained were bloody bodies, shattered lives, and one lingering question: who was this killer? When the police arrived at the scene, the magnitude of the crime was immediately apparent. The crime scene was transformed into a horrific tableau. But there was one thing that immediately drew the detective's attention. There were no traces of the killer. Aside from the gun and the victims, there was only one thing left behind: a mysterious feeling, an unnerving sense that something was wrong. The only question to consider was who this killer was. It was clear that a cold, calculated plan had been set into motion. This murder was just the beginning. The police quickly noted that both young victims were found in their car, with the bullets, fired from close range, striking their backs. At first, it seemed like a robbery or a personal vendetta. But quickly, this murder began to stir fear in the local community. The most terrifying part was that there were no leads on the identity of the killer. The deaths of both teens made the headlines, with local newspapers and television stations reporting on the tragedy. But the killer had left no trace. No one knew who the next victim would be, or why a murderer would choose to kill so coldly. However, the brutality of the murders and the methodical nature of the killings turned that night into an unforgettable symbol of fear. Zodiac, hiding his identity, would continue to leave behind nothing but victims and fear. His goal wasn't just to kill the innocent. It was to leave the world everyone walking the streets living in perpetual unease. The brutality of the murders revealed Zodiac's intelligence and resolve, and that night, The deaths of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday marked the beginning of a series of horrifying murders, a killer's mind games that would seem impossible to comprehend. Fear and mystery grew by the day. In the aftermath of the murders, the once calm air of California seemed heavy, as if hiding the preparations for an impending catastrophe beneath its surface. The deaths of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were just the beginning. The police investigation swiftly began, but the killer remained elusive. Detectives began investigating whether there was any connection between the deaths of the two young victims. However, there was one thing that caught everyone's attention. There were no clues or concrete evidence pointing to a suspect. Everything was chaotic, horrifying, and strange. After pondering over the case for several weeks, the detectives made no progress. Everything seemed at a standstill. No one could understand who the killer was or why these murders had taken place. But then, something unexpected arrived. A strange letter addressed to the San Francisco Chronicle. This letter would mark the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in a homicide detective's career. The letter arrived wrapped in a thick envelope, with no return address or markings that could reveal its origin. The postmark was insufficient to determine its source. However, when the newspaper staff opened the peculiar envelope, they quickly realized the message inside would change the course of the murder investigation. Inside the envelope was a sheet of paper with only a few words written in large letters, words that would send a chilling message to the police. The letter began with a terrifying declaration. "My name is Zodiac. I am a killer, and now I seek revenge. But this is just the beginning. The future will be far more horrific." The signature Zodiac at the top of the letter was initially puzzling. No one had heard that name before, but the strange signature suggested that it might hold a clue to the killer's identity. The newspaper staff immediately forwarded the letter to the detectives. The detectives soon realized that the letter was not just a threatening message. It contained a hidden clue to the murders. Zodiac refused to reveal who he was, but he clearly stated his next steps and the future targets of his killings. As the detectives analyzed the letter, they noticed how carefully each word had been chosen. The letter did not provide any further details about the victims or any explanations, but it did contain surprisingly accurate information about previous murders. Zodiac not only claimed to be the killer, but he also threatened to continue killing and engage in a sort of battle of wits with the police. Frighteningly, Zodiac's letter seemed to be mocking the police. Everything about the letter felt like a challenge, as though the killer was toying with them, confident that they would never catch him. There was something else in the letter, a detail that would send shivers down the spines of the detectives. Zodiac warned that this was only the beginning and promised to send more letters and commit more murders. "I seek revenge," he wrote. But against whom? Who was this person? Who were his targets? These were the first questions the detectives tried to answer. But instead of giving answers, Zodiac left behind something even more disturbing. A cipher. At the end of the letter, Zodiac included a complex cipher. Only the detectives and cryptographers recognized that there might be a hidden message within the letter. The cipher was written in a mix of jumbled symbols, sending a clear message that it needed to be solved. This cipher was not just a secret, that only Zodiac could know. It was a game, a battle of wits with the police. By sending these cryptic messages, Zodiac was not only showcasing his intellect, but also challenging the police to figure it out. These ciphers were like markers of a mysterious plan, signs of a mental labyrinth behind the murders. For the police, this letter was a wake-up call. They realized how cold and intelligent Zodiac was, as revealed by the letter. This was no ordinary murder investigation. It was a battle of wits. On one side, there were the murders. On the other, an intellectual game. The detectives began to understand the intelligence and determination behind these killings, but there was more to it. Zodiac was a killer driven by fear, an incredibly experienced and calculated individual. The letter was just the first step. With each passing day, new ciphers, new threats, and more puzzles would arrive in the mail, further complicating the investigation. Zodiac was determined to leave his signature behind, and with every new letter, the investigation grew more difficult. for the police, and the fear among the public grew. Zodiac's murders and games were only the beginning. Everything he did to exact his revenge would once again shake all of California. Zodiac had created an impact far beyond his killings. He wasn't just introducing himself as a killer, he was acting like a shadow, instilling fear in every corner of society, making people live in constant uncertainty. For him, a murder wasn't just about ending a life, it was about plunging a community into chaos. No matter how hard the police tried to close in on him, Zodiac's cold-blooded mind games made everything a step harder. It was as if he was trapping the public in darkness while pushing the detectives to take steps in an empty field. Understanding the logic behind the murders had become one of the most pressing challenges for the detectives. Zodiac seemed to select his victims randomly. There were no obvious motives or connections. The first killings were limited to couples, but with subsequent murders there was a terrifying transformation. He was so ruthless that it created the impression that nothing could stop him. His killings were no longer just about ending the lives of innocent victims. They were beginning to directly impact society. In the hot summer days of 1969, Zodiac took his next step. This time, his victims were two young people, 12-year-old Darlene Farron and 19-year-old Michael Majot. On a summer evening, Darlene and Michael had parked at a secluded corner of a rural park. The two were enjoying some quiet time together, but what they would remember from that night would be nothing but horror. Zodiac appeared while Darlene and Michael were inside the car. As he walked toward Darlene's side, holding a gun and with a cold expression on his face, the world around them suddenly seemed to fall into a tense silence. Before Michael could react, the gunshot rang out. The first bullet struck Darlene and she screamed. Zodiac, with calm precision, aimed his gun at his victims and kept firing. Michael, despite being seriously injured, managed to survive. As he fell to the ground, he made one final effort to lift his head and examine Zodiac. Covered in blood, struggling to keep his eyes open, he tried to remember the physical features of the killer while keeping his gaze fixed on him. Despite the bullet wounds in his stomach, Michael survived and was rushed to the hospital. Michael's survival became a glimmer of hope for the police. After the incident, the police used the descriptions provided by the survivor in an attempt to identify Zodiac. However, despite their efforts, the information was insufficient to provide any concrete leads. The physical details Michael provided about the killer were vague and inconsistent, creating a dead end for the investigators. Zodiac's ability to execute the murders with cold blood and immediately flee the scene only increased the pressure on the detectives. Moreover, the lack of any definitive evidence related to the killings made the investigation even more difficult. However, there was something even more pressing at play. Zodiac's actions were not limited to just murder. It seemed that the killer was playing a game. The murders were just the beginning. With each killing, he instilled fear in every corner of society, and the police were finding themselves cornered at every step. As part of his twisted game, Zodiac once again sent a letter to the media. This letter was different from the previous ones. It was no longer just a threat. It was also aimed at manipulating the public directly. In his letter, Zodiac stated that his killings were carried out in his own style, and he wrote that he would continue to escalate his crimes. This time, he did not just offer a vague explanation. He left a cryptic message mocking the police with a coded cipher. The hidden messages, ciphers, and symbols were written in such a way that it felt like Zodiac was playing a brain game. These messages were puzzles, mental challenges that needed to be solved in order to uncover the identity of the killer. The police, helpless against Zodiac's constant stream of ciphers, found themselves increasingly frustrated. The encrypted messages not only unsettled the public but also seemed to track the police's every move. The secrecy surrounding Zodiac and the fear he created around his murders plunged the public into a state of grim uncertainty. Each new cipher and each new killing didn't just showcase his intelligence and cold-bloodedness, it also amplified the fear Zodiac spread in the minds of every individual. As the detectives tried to understand Zodiac's targets, they also sought meaning behind his seemingly random choice of victims. But every cipher, every new murder, deepened the mystery and added another layer of uncertainty. a mental chaos was slowly consuming both the police and the public. Which victim would he target next? Which move would be Zodiac's next? Zodiac was not just committing murders. He was creating fear and uncertainty. His goal wasn't just to kill, but to leave a sense of unease, fear, and indecision in the minds of the public. Every murder and every letter made people feel unsafe, even while walking the streets. Zodiac's killer identity spread like a shadow across every part of society, and the question of when, where, and who his next victim would be echoed in the minds of the people. As the summer of 1969 drew to a close, Zodiac became even more brutal with his crimes. His murders were no longer just about physical killings. They were also about tormenting his victims, leaving them to face a psychological game of terror. Zodiac was becoming bolder and more experienced with each killing. What had started as a series of random murders was now escalating into something far more calculated. This time, however, there was something else. A message. Lake Berryessa is a quiet, peaceful reservoir located in the rural areas of California. The surrounding nature and serene atmosphere made it an unlikely location for a deadly act. However, on September 27, 1969, everything would turn into a nightmare for Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard, who were enjoying a picnic by the lake. Brian and Cecilia were spending time peacefully by the still waters of the lake, surrounded by nature. Their thoughts were filled with the sunset and the reflections on the water. However, no matter how peaceful they were, that tranquility would be shattered in an instant, replaced by a horrifying reality. As the hours passed, a man appeared walking toward them. This man was different from the previous victims. He was wearing a costume, a mysterious and dark one. Presenting himself as someone else, he tried to deceive Brian and Cecilia into moving closer to the lake. Then, without warning, he pulled out a gun and began threatening both of them. Zodiac did not just attack with a gun. He began psychologically manipulating his victims as well. In that moment of terror, Brian and Cecilia faced something they never expected. Zodiac offered them a chance to survive. But this offer was not about sparing their lives. It was something entirely different. Zodiac gave his victims the opportunity to identify him as the killer. He made a simple yet chilling request. "You need to describe me to the police. Now, with the blood on you, write this. This man is going to kill me." Zodiac was not only seeking to kill, but also to leave a message, to leave his signature. Brian and Cecilia trembled in fear. The killer showed them the message they were to write. Brian, severely injured, was so disoriented that he could not even comprehend if the writing was accurate. However, the terrifying truth of that moment was that Zodiac wanted more than just to condemn them to death. He wanted to reveal his identity. He allowed his victims to survive, but only so that they could expose him. After injuring Brian and Cecilia, Zodiac left them with a cryptic message before fleeing. Not only had he left a message in his letter, but now he had hidden one within his method of killing. He had turned the moment into a spectacle, attempting to leave a killer's signature behind. The carefully chosen words and actions served as another clue for the police, but this too would lead to another dead end. Brian, weakened and exhausted from fear, was not in a condition to solve the cipher. Nevertheless, Zodiac was showing them not just his desire to kill, but also how a mental game worked. When Zodiac left, Brian and Cecilia managed to survive. However, Brian, injured, tried to provide information about the suspect's physical characteristics. He noted that the killer was a man with certain recognizable features. Brian described the suspect as having white skin, short hair, and an average build. These descriptions were so vague, however, that they didn't provide much help for the police in identifying Zodiac. The surviving victims, through their testimony, gave the first clues about the killer's physical appearance. Although this seemed like a great opportunity for the police, there was still no concrete evidence to confirm Zodiac's identity. Zodiac had always planned his murders not only to leave a trail, but also to create a deliberate mystery. This became a curse for the police. While trying to decipher Zodiac's ciphers, they would also discover that each victim had a different story and a different lie connecting them. Zodiac always seemed one step ahead. His murders were not just about creating fear, but also about turning them into spectacles to manipulate the public. The terror Brian and Cecilia experienced only served to further elevate Zodiac as a ghost in the eyes of the public, while also revealing that behind each of his killings lay an increasingly complex mental game. This attack was different from Zodiac's previous actions. Now the killer wasn't just killing, he was increasing fear and suspicion with every step, turning the act of hiding his identity into an art. The police, after each murder, tried to figure out Zodiac's strategy, but the more they failed, the deeper the game became. The Lake Berryessa attack was a reflection not only of Zodiac's ruthless methods, but also of his strategy to create fear and uncertainty. The tense atmosphere of that moment wasn't just about the message Zodiac left behind. It was part of a much bigger game, a complex puzzle that was almost impossible to solve. Zodiac had begun a battle of wits with both the police and society. However, with each new murder, the path grew darker. Zodiac's killings had left more than just bloody traces. They had created a mental game. Each murder presented a puzzle to the public, and with every new move, the killer's actions added to the tension, making the mystery even harder to solve. However, what made Zodiac's game unique was that the murders were just the beginning. Behind the killings, there were always complex ciphers and hidden messages. These cryptic letters not only made Zodiac's murders and plans even more terrifying, but also turned them into a complex battle of wits for the detectives. Toward the end of 1969, Zodiac initiated a challenge by sending encrypted messages to the San Francisco Chronicle. These messages affected not just the police but the entire world. The encrypted texts were written in a complex language using different characters and symbols. Each cipher carried a meaning as terrifying as Zodiac's methods of killing, remaining a puzzle until solved. Zodiac's first cipher, known as the Zodiac letter, was a 408-character complex message. The letter symbolized the dark thoughts behind Zodiac's murders. In it, Zodiac threatened that the killings were only the beginning, and he would commit more slaughter. However, solving this encrypted letter posed a great challenge for detectives and codebreakers. It was said that there was a meaningful message hidden within, but deciphering it seemed almost like an impossible dream. Zodiac lured those trying to solve his ciphers, only to lead them into a dead end. The ciphers did not only require a mathematical or linguistic solution, but also relied on much deeper logic and knowledge. In every encrypted message, there were not only characters and symbols but also clues that directly referenced Zodiac's personality, challenging the intellect of anyone attempting to decode them. It was like a psychological war. With each cipher, Zodiac began a battle of wits with the police and codebreakers. Each of these letters carried elements that made his escape harder, while also complicating his capture. However, there was something in Zodiac's ciphers and messages that set him apart from others. Each cipher was not just a message but also a war against society, which was trying to assign meaning to it. The encrypted messages, with every clue being analyzed, created growing uncertainty in the public. As detectives struggled to solve the hidden meanings, they also observed members of the police department discussing their own theories and resorting to different methods in the search for Zodiac's true identity. Deciphering Zodiac's letters took considerable time. The first people to crack the cipher sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle informing them that they had solved it. However, this was only the beginning of deciphering Zodiac's cryptic messages. Each cipher became more complex than the last, with more people trying and failing to solve them. Zodiac's letters were not only filled with ciphers and symbols, they also contained clues that could expose his killer identity. The ciphers provided insights into how Zodiac saw himself, making it difficult for those trying to understand him psychologically. Some ciphers contained intricate details about the victims Zodiac planned to kill, and at times hidden signals regarding when and how the murders would occur. Zodiac had turned the process of solving ciphers into a test. The murders had now evolved into a mental battle, combining ciphers and symbols. This battle wasn't just against the police but also the public. The efforts to solve the ciphers not only dragged society into more uncertainty, but also created a constant sense of fear in The public's mind. With each new cryptic message, Zodiac kept his killer identity even more concealed, and the messages behind the ciphers grew increasingly perplexing. Though there were obstacles in solving the ciphers, some experts and cipher enthusiasts managed to crack Zodiac's complex language, uncovering a few important details about him. However, this solution didn't provide enough concrete information to catch Zodiac, though many clues were revealed. Each new cipher brought a step closer to understanding Zodiac's hidden identity and intentions, but as each new cipher was solved, Zodiac's mysterious and complex nature became even more pronounced, making his escape even harder. Decoding the I ciphers appeared to be a reward for detectives, but with every solution came new questions and mysteries. With each message, Zodiac proved his intellect to everyone, continually surprising both society and the police. The confidence that he was always one step ahead of them was one of the strongest factors making his capture more difficult. In the end, Zodiac's cryptic letters and messages became tools that both increased the fear and uncertainty in the minds of the public and provided an avenue for the police to try to understand the killer's psychological profile. Solving the ciphers was not just a battle of intellect but also a process that could bring the police one step closer to identifying Zodiac. However, this was like a journey. Every new solution led to more puzzles and mysteries to face. Zodiac's murders had caused a wide echo in the media and made the public live in fear. Each murder left behind not only fear, but also a complex puzzle that needed to be solved. However, as the years passed, Zodiac's identity remained unsolved. Detectives, experts, and the public continued to track the killer's trail. But with each passing year, the ciphers and murders remained unresolved. The killer had disappeared like a ghost, and all traces had vanished suddenly. Zodiac, mocking the police at every opportunity, stood in defiance of the efforts of both the public and the authorities to catch him. With his cryptic letters, mind games with the press, and even the way he committed his murders, he was always one step ahead. He wasn't just a killer, he was also a strategist, turning his murders, ciphers, and letters into a sort of intellectual competition. However, as time went on, something changed. Zodiac suddenly stopped appearing. By the late 1970s, Zodiac's crimes abruptly ceased. No new murders were committed. New letters, new ciphers, and new threats disappeared. But it wasn't just the crimes that vanished. The killer's identity, along with the unresolved mystery, was lost too. Zodiac had vanished suddenly, and the IGAM police, the public, and the media tried to understand what had happened behind his disappearance. However, this disappearance, along with the sudden silence of what had once been a great source of fear, intensified the sense of uncertainty and mystery. After Zodiac's disappearance, detectives considered many possibilities. Some speculated that the killer had died, while others suggested he might have ended up in prison. Other theories proposed that Zodiac had decided to end his criminal activities and lead a normal life, or perhaps move to a completely different place. However, Zodiac's sudden disappearance brought with it a series of different possibilities and complex questions. It was as if a ghost had erased its trail, and things were as uncertain as at the beginning. Zodiac's disappearance caused great confusion in society. The fear created by the murders and ciphers suddenly faded. The media, instead of tracking his every new move, tried to maintain the impact of this unsolved mystery by republishing old stories about him. However, even though everything seemed to calm down, there was still a question mark in society. Who was Zodiac? Although the killer had disappeared for a moment, the unanswered questions and unsolved ciphers kept the public constantly occupied. Even years later, the police and the media continued to follow old evidence in an attempt to solve this mystery. Many years later, some detectives tried to uncover Zodiac's identity. During this process, biometric technologies, genetic analyses, and modern investigative methods brought up some possibilities. However, these efforts always ended in failure. Zodiac's identity remained unclear. Many predictions about the killer were based on probabilities, but none reached a definitive conclusion. This was because Zodiac had planned his crimes so intelligently and carefully. Each murder, each cipher, each letter showed just how clever and detached he truly was. Zodiac had disappeared like a ghost, but the mystery and fear he left behind continued to live on. Although Zodiac's identity is still unknown, research into his murders and letters has deepened over the years. Investigators pursuing the killer's trail continued to try to solve the crimes and ciphers, but Zodiac's disappearance remained the biggest mystery for both the public and the media. No one knew who Zodiac truly was or why he suddenly vanished. However, one thing was certain: Zodiac would remain an unsolved mystery for years to come. Zodiac's disappearance raised one last doubt. Perhaps this was part of his plan. Maybe Zodiac thought everything had drawn too much attention, and at some point, by disappearing, he intended to create an even greater mystery. Everyone thought it had all come to an end, but perhaps Zodiac would return one day, or he would forever remain a ghost in history, never revealing his identity. From that moment on, Zodiac would continue to be the greatest fear of the public and the police, and the unsolved mystery of all time.